Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on how to avoid the 7 costly mistakes membership bodies make on technology projects. My name is Alan Reed, and I'm a director of GetSavvy. At GetSavvy, we provide online self-paced project management training, as well as advice for ordinary business people who are faced with a technology project. So this webinar topic is dear to my heart, as we so often see the same mistakes causing project overruns and wasted money over and over again. And as well as that, we see the very human problems of the extreme stress and upset that comes from bad projects. So let's see what we can do, including with this webinar, to not have that happen anymore. We're re-recording this webinar because the feed from our speakers on the recording this morning didn't take. So I'll be repeating the insights that they provided in response to the common project problems that we will be helping you avoid. So our two speakers today were Jacqueline Easton, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the London Fire Brigade Welfare Fund. Jackie has a strong background in technology projects within the not-for-profit sector, including working with an organization with over 200 staff and literally tens of thousands of members that had been using the same old system for over 20 years. With me today also is Gordon Glenister. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Membership World, and also has been on the senior management team with membership bodies. And one of the projects that he talks about is where he was CEO of an organization with 7 staff. So we have the whole range of size and scales of projects, trying to manage everything within that organization and team. So with that said, let's move on to the content. So with our agenda today, what we'll be doing is going through the different stages of a project and looking at the problems that happen in that phase of the project. So we'll start off with the business case and look at the difficulties that happen during that phase with funding and setting realistic expectations for the overall project. Then we'll move on to choosing your preferred supplier and the process that you might go through in doing that, and the difficulties of getting your requirements defined and making sure that there's a complete common understanding between you and your new preferred supplier, and avoiding the disputes and arguments that can happen so commonly later. Then we're moving on to preparing your own organization for a project. So essentially making sure that your management team are ready to make decisions and supervise the project, and that you have a project manager in place who's empowered to deliver. And of course, all of your colleagues around the organization are aware of how much extra work this project is going to take and are prepared to support the project. Then we move on to the implementation phase itself. So now that you've prepared everyone, here's the reality of delivering the project. And some of the most common problems tend to be around resourcing the project so that people can fit the work in amongst their day job. Also getting the right level of enthusiasm and buy-in for the project so that people are actually using the solution and are ready to change their business processes in light of the new technology you're providing. And then the final problem during that phase tends to be scope creep, where everyone is asking for extras or asking for changes. And how do you manage that whilst still keeping to your budget and timeline on the project? At the very end, there were some quick-fire questions and Q&A questions that we will also cover off on the webinar. Okay, so let's get off to the actual project phases. If we start off by the business case phase, this is where people are actually finding themselves asking their fund holders. It might be a council, it might be a board of trustees, it might be a finance committee, to fund the project. And one of the most common problems is to treat this like you're begging for money to do something. Whereas the reality is, if you don't get the sufficient resources and funding you require to do a project well, you're actually jeopardizing your project. There's a very real risk that you'll end up wasting the money that you do get allocated, and that you'll end up getting to that true cost just via a series of arguments and difficulties later. So what we find very, very important during that phase is essentially to treat it as an opportunity to provide decision support to your fund holders and make sure they're they're aware of everything you need to deliver the project properly. So that means don't do the typical thing of underbidding by saying, I don't think they'll approve this, so I'll ask for less. And then you leave out the cost of your resourcing, you leave out the cost of other help you might need from your current supplier, and you get that approved. Well, that's your problem now, because you've asked for what you are going to ask for. They've given you what you've asked for, but it's not enough, and that means it's on you. So how do we go about avoiding those kind of issues? Well, there's some specific practical steps that we encourage people to consider. First of all, recognize that the business case, if done correctly, is where you're going to establish the foundation for your project. This is not a time to hide costs or hide the true extent of the help that you need. So essentially, it's where you have to make sure that everyone is aware of exactly what work is going to be involved in the project, how long it's going to take to deliver the project, what the risks are, and of course the benefits while you're doing the project in the first place. So treat it seriously, treat it as something that is where you get the bad news out, but you explain why the project is necessary, and therefore why it's still a good idea to go ahead with it. On top of that, a really common mistake on business cases is essentially to treat it as something you do in a vacuum. So you create a document, you can go online, it'll say put in that section and put in that section, put in a table of costs. And then you do all of that in isolation, and then you email it to people, or you put it forward for funding approval. And then, of course, it gets rejected because people are not aligned with it, they don't buy into it. One of the things we find to be most important is to treat it as a collaboration. So essentially work closely with your key stakeholders, your finance department, your other people around the organization, and say, what are the problems you're having? Here's what I propose we do about those problems. And do you agree? Have I missed anything? Have I misrepresented anything in there? In addition, we suggest making sure that you're giving a true cost of ownership of the project. That means, don't forget, you're probably going to need some extra resource like a project manager. You're probably going to need your existing supplier to support the project and do things with the data or integrations to help your new supplier take over the project. All of that's going to cost money. And if you have to keep going back and asking for extra money, it'll undermine the board's confidence in you, and it'll also make your project look like a failure. So get it all out early. And define a pessimistic view of your total cost of ownership of the project. Likewise, we always say it's very important to make sure that where you are worried of things getting approved or not approved, don't hide the cost of the project, but you might choose to put in 2 levels of costing. So level 1 is saying this is the minimum we have to do in order to resolve these issues, to be able to meet our goals as an organization, in order to modernize. And then there's a level 2, which is the areas that would be of additional benefit to us and would allow us to compete better, or to provide additional services to our members. And then you explain the difference in terms of the benefits as well as the cost. And then allow your funding group to own the problem with you, share the problem with them, so that they're aware of it, and they're able to make that decision from a fully informed position. So from there, what we did is we asked Jackie for her top tip as a veteran of many business case proposals. And Jackie had 2 top tips for people who are seeking funding and approval from an organizational funding group, a board of trustees, etc. Top tip number 1 is always to allow a sufficient contingency on what you're asking for. In some ways, especially if you think they're going to try and haggle, or there might be a lower amount of money approved, but just on general principles, you're likely to find that some area of cost will increase during the lifetime of the project, and you need to allow for that. You need to allow for a 10 or 15% contingency on what you think the realistic costs are for the project. And then the second top tip from Jackie was essentially to make it as much of a collaboration as possible. As you're developing the business case, go and talk to your different department heads, go and talk to your different directors, go and talk to the awkward squad, the people who might be least enthusiastic about the project or funding the project, and tackle those objections early and make sure that they're reflected in the document. That process can often bring people on board with your proposal before you're asking for the money, which can be extremely important in terms of getting your project approved. So then we go on to another really common problem during the business case phase, which is the problem of unrealistic expectations. One of the most common expectations on this kind of project is essentially that your supplier is going to do everything on the project for you. And that essentially means that your organization thinks, well, I'll just get this new supplier, I'll pay them some money, and then they'll do the equivalent of doing all of the work and pushing the Hoover around. And all I have to do is kind of pick up my foot as they go past and put it down again when they're on their way. And the reality is that for every hour that a supplier spends on your project, your organization is going to spend about 8 or 10 hours across the different people in your organization doing that. So really the balance of work is on the client side. So it's really important to set those expectations early. You're bringing together all of your complex needs and the complex offering from different suppliers that you're going to be considering. And it's going to take a lot of work for you to understand it, for your teams to change their business processes. So make sure you're being clear about that at the business case phase, especially when you're asking for extra resources and funding on that. Also take into account how long the project is going to take, how long it's going to take to deliver the benefits, and making sure that everyone has signed off on that. Because what can often happen is that different directors of the organization can have quite different views of what the project is going to do and what it's going to mean for their team and what it means for their department. And that means it's literally impossible for a supplier to deliver to that because essentially what you... And on the topic of setting expectations, one of the most common problems we see is that the management team within an organization is not in agreement with what a project is going to do or how it's going to be done. People think they are. They think they understand, oh, we're just going to replace this thing. But there are such huge differences between what one form of replacement might mean versus another, that what then happens is the project gets started and then these disagreements appear. These clarifications need made. No, we're not doing that. That's not included. That's something that we'll do in the future, perhaps. And then, of course, the supplier has no way of delivering to that, and the project is in trouble at the foundation level right away. On the topic of setting expectations properly, one of the most common problems we find is that the directors of an organization are not themselves in agreement with what the project is going to achieve. Everyone says, okay, well, we're going to replace this. But beyond that, there's a world of detail of what that can mean. And what then happens is after the project started, people are saying, I thought we were doing this, or I thought that was included. And then it isn't, and that can lead to difficulties. And the supplier almost has a moving target to deliver to. So it's important to look at the business case process, not just as a yes, no on approvals, but also as this huge opportunity to make sure everyone is in agreement and signed off on the true understanding of what the project is going to do and what it's not going to do. So there are some specific steps that we suggest that people consider as part of making sure that those bad things don't happen. So part of it is, for instance, working closely and iteratively with your key stakeholders. As we've said before, don't try and do it in a vacuum. As you start off typically by looking at what your organization is trying to achieve. Start with your business goals as an organization. They're often on your own website. And then say, okay, how is this project going to support these business goals? And actually create a list and say it'll support them this way and that way. And how are these business case goals not possible unless we do this project? Look at the different problems you have around your organization, and then get a common understanding of how this project is going to help solve those problems. But by going around and talking to people about that, you'll make sure that you're not missing anything. You'll make sure they're on board by seeing that their problems are going to be solved, and then making sure that your report, your business case has credibility, and that people aren't going to be arguing about it later. A next big step that people often miss is this being realistic and pessimistic. Most vendor selections take 3 or 4 months to execute. Most implementation projects take a minimum of 9, 10 months, and often quite a lot more of that. So be realistic about how much work it'll take, and how long the project will take as well. We've seen so many projects where people try and load it onto the day job of existing people within the organization. People then go off on stress leave and have all sorts of difficulties and problems. And it's just not fair. It's not moral to put your colleagues in that position. So use the business case to be realistic about the degree of work and how much extra resource and time you might need to buy in and add to the budget as part of making the project a success. And then fostering open communications, we find it to be vital, and that starts with the business case. That means socializing, to use that term, the business case with as many team leaders and people on the management team as possible, and asking for yes and no and positive feedback, and making sure they recognize that that feedback has been taken into account. So from there, we ask for Gordon's top tip on this. Gordon's top tip was relating to the fact that often the management team are super expert in their own organization and with their own members and their own goals, but there's no reason why they should also be super expert in technology projects and how much these things cost and how much they take and so on. So his advice was to get some help for this phase, to engage a consultant on perhaps just a few days of work to advise on what's realistic to expect, what's it realistic to spend, and how to make sure that the foundations are there so that you go on to have a successful project based on those foundations. Don't be, the blind leading the blind, or people who don't know what they don't know, and then rushing out to market, which I thought was solid advice if you can do that. So then we get on to the next phase of the project. Imagine your business case has been approved. Your funding group have said, all right, you've asked for all of this money, you've promised all of these benefits. If we approve this money, okay, we're going to give it to you. You're now in this terrifying position where you focused on getting approval. Now you've got it. You've got to make sure you deliver on it. You've got to make sure that it comes good, or else, of course, you're in the firing line for taking it that far. So one of the earliest parts of the actual project is defining what you as an organization really need. You'll have done it at a high level within the business case, setting out the problems and the opportunities and the benefits of the project. But of course, you can't just give that to a supplier and say, here is what we need. So this is your first area where you're going around your organization and your colleagues, and you're trying to get them to define what they need. And it can often go wrong. People often, for instance, focus on the current system. They're thinking too much about how they work now. And unless you get this right, then of course, what you give to potential suppliers to meet your needs is going to be wrong. They're going to cost it wrongly. They're going to expect to do things that are wrongly. Then of course, it won't fit your business when it comes to the actual go live of your system. So how do we avoid that? What do we do to make sure that doesn't happen? So first of all, recognize that a lot of the problems when it comes to requirements gathering and requirements definition are, of course, people side problems caused by the fact that people are very busy and you're asking for their time to do things, but also people don't understand realistically what a requirements document looks like. So what you have to do at this phase is recognize those challenges. Don't just sit in front of people and start asking them what they do for a living. So start the whole process with a big kind of hearts and minds campaign. This is where ideally you're getting the senior management team not just to send out an email saying, oh, great news, we're going to be doing a project and choosing a supplier in a few months, but actually getting them to support you in explaining to your different stakeholders that it's vital that they support this project. This is their opportunity to say what they need and make sure that they get it. And it's in their interest to commit to this process, put the time in, and treat it seriously. Don't just think, oh, I'm sure they know what they're doing. I'll give them a high level view of what I do, and then I'll get everything I need at the end of it. That's not going to work. So focusing on that people side, and getting your senior management team to agree to put pressure actually and inform your colleagues to treat this process seriously, in order to make sure you're not going to get a bunch of complaints later that they're not getting what they need out of the project. Secondly, don't treat it as a passive process. Don't treat requirements gathering as just sitting in front of people and they say, oh, I'd like this and I'd like that and I'd like the other. You've got to use it as an opportunity to challenge, because people don't understand what a requirements document should look like. It's not actually about what you do, how you do your job now. It's about what the purpose of what you're trying to achieve is. And so you have to treat it at that level, treat it at a business process level, and treat it as what you're trying to achieve and get that clarified. So you're trying to challenge requirements coming at you, and you're trying to educate people where possible and where you can about what's available in the marketplace now and how people tend to work in a different way. So for instance, just because your members have to phone you up right now to do something or send you an email, wouldn't it be better if they could self-serve that online? Just because you have to do this by hand right now, wouldn't it be better if there was an automation that did that thing for you as part of your new system? So challenging requirements and educating people where you can. We find that to be a very big part of it. Don't just take a list from the different stakeholders and then just give that to a supplier. As I was talking about a moment ago, the important thing is to recognize that your new suppliers, they're providing systems that are almost, well, they've been used many times before by organizations like you. Bear in mind that your new supplier will be providing systems that are already in use by lots of organizations like you. So you don't have to worry about this really granular stuff like saying, oh, it has to have this field and that field and that field. Really what you're giving to that kind of potential supplier is a description of what you need to do for a living as a business, broken out by all of your different business processes, what the purpose of what you're trying to achieve. And then really it's their job to explain how it would be done with their help and their systems. So a really common mistake here is that people focus on their current system. I would say actually avoid even looking at your current system, because all that does is define what you wanted 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. Ignore that and actually just focus on what you're trying to achieve today, what your business processes are today. And then the final point there is make sure you're providing a priority for everything. So this is vital, and this would be nice to have if we can have it. If nothing else, that will help you with your project phasing, and certainly could help you manage the budgets and how you choose between suppliers in terms of what they can provide you at the must-have end and at the slightly more luxury end. So on that, we asked Jackie for her top tip on requirements gathering. And one of the things that she said is that you can't start that preparation process too early. Getting the senior management team to explain what the project is about, or even if you're giving the senior management team the words to do it, having town hall meetings before you start where you're explaining what the benefits of this process is to them and what their role is in it, and how really they don't have a choice about cooperating. They can negotiate about when, but the principle is there. So you really can't start that process too early. So great. So moving on from there, let's talk about the next set of project areas and common problems that happen there. And that's with the partner selection process, the vendor selection process. And one of the common challenges that people experience here is not recognizing that this is going to be one of the main determining factors. What comes out of this phase will be one of the main determining factors on your project. If you start this process where you've got a whole set of misunderstandings between you and your preferred supplier, then that's going to come out quickly, and it'll lead to a whole bunch of arguments and disputes, and everyone's exhausted in no time. But to get that common understanding between you and your preferred supplier, involves making sure you're putting in the time and the work across a range of organizations that might be your preferred supplier eventually, to evaluate them and make sure they understand what they're bidding for, and what the costs are supposed to cover. So the specific things that we advise to avoid having difficulties with this is, first of all, recognize that it's going to consume an awful lot of your time. A typical vendor selection process for a new membership management system, or a new website, or a combination of both, or even a new finance system, etc. They'll typically take something up to 3 months or even more to execute. If you think it'll take around about a month to define what you want and get everyone to sign off on it and all of the back and forth around that, you then have to choose who you're going to issue that to, and then allow them a month to respond to it. And then once those documents come back after that second month, it'll typically take you a month or even 2 months to evaluate not only the documents, but of course all of the presentations and the meetings and the reference visits, etc. With that, all of that is extremely time consuming. If our advice is typically to have a pretty short list of people that you are considering working with, and then spend days and days and days with each one of those potential suppliers, any one of which could do the job. They've got a track record in being able to do the job. But in order to work out if they're the ones where you like the way they do the job, and there's that common misunderstanding, you're probably going to have to do 3 or 4 meetings with each of them at a minimum, plus the references, plus the documents examination. And you multiply that up by the number of staff in your organization that you're involving in the process, and you then start to see what a hugely time-consuming exercise it is. And it's just vital to allow that time and not try and skimp it, because you'll spend subsequent years regretting it if you do. Then one of the another common problem is that, of course, you're going through a sales cycle, and they want your business and so on. And it's not a matter of suppliers just lying to you. That's not really the common thing that happens. But what often happens is that suppliers are giving you their generic presentation. They're giving you their generic view of the software and how projects work. And actually, that can just leave a whole wealth of detail and assumptions on both sides about what's included and what's not, and who's doing what blocks of work. So we strongly recommend making suppliers work for it in a polite and very convivial way, but take a prove it approach. So ask that they show you your complicated areas. Ask that they introduce you to clients that are already doing your complicated bits, whatever you think they are, and it's running in a live environment. So get them to put them through their paces. Take a skeptical, friendly, but skeptical approach to that. Don't just take the standard sales presentations. Where there is an assertion that's made in the meeting, like, oh, we will be with you every step of the way, our senior management team are available day and night, etc., etc. The way of checking that is to go and talk to their existing clients and say, so how was it during the project itself? Were the senior management team always available to you? How did they respond when there was a dispute? And just validate what you're being told that way, because it all contributes to your decision making. It all contributes to who you think is the best partner for you moving forward. And then the third thing, just really briefly, is that we find the most important determinant of whether you're going to have a good project with a supplier or not is actually their track record. Don't focus on the difference between this technology or that technology, the difference between Salesforce and Dynamics, for instance. They can both actually do pretty much every kind of project with enough time and money put into them. What's really going to determine success or failure is not the constant arms race between the different technology tools. It's actually going to be the track record of the supplier in being able to work with you to make that fit your business processes and all of your external engagements that you require. That's going to be the difference. So checking their track record and checking their references is something that's going to be just vital for determining the right decision at this point. Okay, so we asked Gordon's top tip around that. One of his really great pieces of advice here was to make sure that you're meeting with the actual project team during the evaluation cycle. Don't just have the salesperson and perhaps the CEO at the meeting who are making all sorts of assurances. demand to meet the project team, and ideally the person who's likely to be your project manager. Not always possible because they don't know when you're going to go ahead or not, but ask for a representative of the project's team, and to a very good analysis of how they deliver projects, how much time is required on the client side, what are the expectations that they would set with you in terms of making it a success, and make sure that that's realistic. Again, you're talking to their clients as well as talking to the presentation team. Okay, so then moving on to the next phase of the project. Imagine that you're going through your vendor selection process. You're eventually going to come up with your preferred supplier and start working with them. What we find a really key thing to do that often gets forgotten is to be preparing your own organization in parallel with the vendor selection process. So what happens a lot, an awful lot, is that people think, my new supplier is going to tell me how to run the project. They're going to do, all of this stuff for me. And then I'll start thinking about these things after our, as part of the kickoff meeting with our new supplier. And you're already doomed at that point if that's your approach. So what should really be happening is, in parallel with the vendor selection process, as you're evaluating suppliers, at least a month before you are going to be starting your project, ideally a couple of months before you're actually going to be spending money every month with this new supplier, you need to be thinking about how you as a business are going to absorb this project, how you're going to deliver all of the work, how you're going to make decisions on this project. And a failure to do that will mean that people are constantly surprised with the project. It'll just drift, and the budgets will be wasted. So what should we do about that and making sure that doesn't happen? So first of all, if you want to make sure you're not the ones with that expression on your face all of the way through, and your staff are not constantly surprised by the workload, what you have to do is start this process, as I say, a couple of months before your supplier is appointed and you're going to have a kickoff meeting with them. This preparation phase is about you. It's about making sure your resources are braced for the project. It's about your governance, and about making sure that you are ready to take the project on. So, and what governance means here, as we put a quick clarification, is that your management team, who's going to be your project board, it might be your whole SMT, or it might be a subsection of that, they're prepared to make decisions. They have a schedule of meetings. They know who's going to be the project sponsor or the main person in the management team responsible for the project. And they understand that their role is primarily to support the project team and support their project manager, not just to shout at that person every 3 months when something might be going wrong. And that's going to consume an amount of their time and consume an amount of their focus. But their role is to champion the project and provide that level of support. And then making sure, as part of this preparation phase, that all of your project resources are defined, that people know where they fit into the project, who your project team is going to be, who your different subject matter experts are in your different teams, and how much their time is going to be consumed, and making sure that all of the work that needs doing, someone is expecting to do it, and they're familiar with that. You can get advice on how to set up your project before you execute it, and that can typically be a small amount of time that can really make a difference later. Then we find that people often underestimate the fact that project planning during the project itself is going to be a joint exercise with you and your new preferred supplier. What we mean by that is that, for instance, your supplier is going to deliver some software for you to test. Well, that means that months ahead of that, you need to have explained that this team needs to be available to test, income processing or events management. And the whole thing will fall apart if that team's often running the annual conference or is off on holiday with vital stakeholders. So recognizing that there are some key project documents, like your schedule of availability, like your resourcing and people on the project team, like your stakeholder engagement documents, and then getting those all set up so that your new supplier can slot into that, and make sure that there are no surprises later. So the project plan needs to be comprehensive across your side of the organization and your suppliers' resources as well, in order to avoid a constant series of surprises. And then part of it, of the preparation phase, is making sure that you're formally setting up your project team before the supplier is appointed. So you should be having internal meetings around governance, around how projects are going, what project documents are going to be used, what meetings are going to be used, what's expected of people, and make sure that everyone's expecting that they're empowered to have time away from their day job, that you have got the external resource in place in time for the actual project, so that you avoid this all too common issue that the project starts and then people are just not available for it, or that people are available minimally, which is almost worse, because that means that your supplier is still consuming their budget with you, but you're not able to take advantage of it. You're not able to make decisions. You're not able to go and do the follow-up exercises later, which means that, of course, you run out of budget without the benefits that you're expecting from that budget, and you have to spend it again. So Jackie's top tip on the resourcing side was, first of all, make sure the senior management are strongly involved. So as the project manager on this or that project, you're no one's boss. This is one of the most common realizations they have. You can't tell people what to do. You can only ask them. So that means you have to borrow the authority from the senior management team. So well before you're asking for people's time and resource, you should be getting the senior management team to understand what's required in their different areas, be prepared to communicate that with people, and be prepared to walk the line, which is when people say, I'm not available, they say, well, you're going to have to be, so let's negotiate when you're available and where it's going to fit into your priorities. You as a project manager, for instance, or your project manager won't be able to do that without the senior management team being involved. So have the senior management team a big part of the preparation phase, where you're agreeing your resources and your workload around the organization. So moving on from there, we then get to the actual project itself. And this challenge of resourcing carries on. You've now got your preferred supplier in place, you're having meetings with your preferred supplier, work is being allocated, they're off doing things, they're expecting you're going to be doing things and meeting them an awful lot of the time. And as I mentioned earlier, research shows that for every hour that a supplier spends on your project, you as a client will spend 8 or 10 hours in order to match what they're doing, spread across different resources. So really the great majority of the work is on your side. So big parts of avoiding these issues. And as I say, if you're not absorbing the project properly, the supplier is still doing the days, they're still meeting with you, they've still got a project manager in place, and so the budget is still being consumed. So what can we do to get the best out of all of that? So first of all, make sure that your organization and management team are aligned and empowered to get the best out of your staff. That means being able to tell stakeholders on the ground, the people who manage your income, who manage your events, who manage your membership, telling them this project comes first on these areas. You're allowed to let the day job slip a little. If you're telling people who are already really busy that you expect them to deliver all of this and all of this on top of it, it's not going to work. So giving people the empowerment to say, yes, during these phases where you're expecting to spend days on testing or defining your business processes in the new system, we allow the day job to slip. Now, sneakily, as a management person, you think, oh, I'll hope they catch up with it later. But ideally, you're being realistic that some things are just not going to be done the way that they normally are. Okay, and then the next thing is recognizing the importance of your project manager. The reality is that your project will succeed or fail based on your client-side project manager. Your supplier-side project manager will manage their resources and will bring their value to the project. But actually, you need someone on your side who's going to be managing your resources, getting the best out of that supplier, responding to problems, looking ahead and avoiding problems, and of course, working with the senior management team to make sure all of this gets delivered. That can either be someone brought in who's a professional project manager, and that's ideal if you can afford it. Obviously, someone who's done this lots of times before will avoid a lot of the problems and will put things in place that means that misunderstandings and problems do not happen. If you can't afford it, then it's realistically going to be a full-time member of staff within your organization, and you have to consider what's happening to the 40 hours a week they're doing already. And you can't expect that that's just going to be added on. So really, either bringing in someone or making sure that you're providing all the support you can for an internal person, which means largely getting rid of their day job and providing them with training and providing them with guidance if they've never done this kind of project before, is your best way of de-risking your own project. And then recognize the amount of time required for different stakeholders. I won't go through this in the interest of time. We're sending this to you, but essentially it's chunks of time a week, and depending on your role within the project structure. And if you don't allow for it, of course, then the work won't get done. Something's got to give. Okay, Gordon's top tip on this was essentially not to overload your internal people. So Gordon's had experience of someone actually going off on stress leave because there was a small organization and this person was expected to take on all the volume of work that comes with a project. That means huge numbers of meetings. Every meeting has a whole bunch of documents and follow-ups and chases that are supposed to be happening, decisions that need to be made. Well, by the time you've done a week or two of that, you've got literally hundreds of threads of activity and confirmations and things that you're waiting for and things that you should be chasing and things that you should be doing. And just loading that onto your existing workload is just not going to happen, as I keep saying. So Gordon's recommendation is to be realistic about what resource you have available and to make sure that you're providing support for them or actually bringing in additional resource to do that. Okay, so then we get to the next really common problem that happens, almost universal at this level of problem, which is during the implementation phase itself. So you've got your new supplier, you've got your team in place, you're going through the process of trying to make your business processes work within the new system. Make sure that your data is migrated, integrations, external engagement channels, reporting, all of those kind of things. And what really common thing takes place here is that it becomes a technology project. It becomes focused and goes into a little huddle between your supplier and your project team, because you're all about the data migration and the integration and the configuration. So what happens effectively is that you ask your main group of stakeholders, what is it you require, as part of the requirements gathering. You then completely ignore them for the best part of a year. And then shortly before go live, you offer them a half a day's training and say, now we need you to change the way you work entirely. And the whole thing goes crash, bang, wallop, where people reject the system, or they find, that their business processes aren't supported, or they feel that, there's all sorts of objections and things that they don't like. And then they go back to the ways that they were working before, or just complain like hell. So how do we not do that? How do we not have that deeply unpleasant thing where the project go live is full of complaints and misunderstandings? Well, the first thing is to recognize that the people side of your project is the most important side. Don't just go into this huddle on the technology. Recognize that the only benefits you will get from this project are not because you've changed one bit of software for another. The only benefits you'll get out of this project is that people have changed the way they work or changed the way they engage with you if they're external stakeholders. And once you recognize that those changes on the people side are your only source of benefits, then you focus your project around that. And that means expecting to spend the time at every stage of your implementation project, not just at the end with half a day's training, every stage as the software is starting to come to shape and decisions are starting to be made, that you're having engagements with your current users. You're explaining what's going on. You're asking them for feedback. You're exposing the software to them as early as possible. You're looking for your champions. And all of this is really time consuming. The temptation is to go into that software huddle, but actually having all of these kind of meetings and explaining what's going on and providing two-way communication channels, it consumes a lot of time, but it'll actually save you a ton of time. Because if you don't do it, you're going to end up having to run the project again, but this time trying to get people on board. And once your money has gone and your supplier is no longer expected to deliver all of the services that they delivered once already. So building that interaction and allowing for that time is one of the most vital things you can do to avoid a failed project. So as I've talked ahead of my slides, recognizing that benefits only come from how people change how they work. That means once you recognize that, spending enough time with your different stakeholders so that you're saying, okay, this is what the project is going to deliver at your end. This is our understanding of your business processes and how it's going to, what they'll be in the new world, and allowing them to get familiar with that, challenge it, say, no, I forgot to tell you this, or you've misunderstood that. Doing all of that as early as possible, very time consuming, but actually going to save you agonies later. So you really have to do that. And it's so often forgotten. People give it all sorts of lip service at the beginning. We're going to invest in buy-in. We're going to try and bring the staff along with the project. But then as soon as the project hits any kind of technical bump in the road, all of that goes under the bus. Forget about the staff. We'll just focus on working with the supplier. And then the awful go live happens after that. Okay, and then this all requires ongoing active engagement from the management team. If the change management side is going to consume a lot of your time, it's also going to consume a lot of time from your different teams and stakeholders around the organization, and they might not be willing to do it. They might not be happy to change the way they work. They might be very cooperative people, but they're just flat out busy. And the only way of working around that, but getting the best of that, is again with the senior management team, always repeating that this project is vital for the future of the organization, to meet organizational goals. Everyone's expected to support and cooperate with the project to get the best out of it for their own team and for their external stakeholders. And where there is a problem, that the senior management team have to respond by going and talking to people in order to get them to give what they need for the project. Okay, so Jackie's top tip with this was ideally you would allow at least a day or two a week during the implementation phase for the communication side, for the meeting side, for the pizza lunches, for getting people exposed to the software early, and setting up the channels where people can say, I think you've forgotten this, or I think this is awful, and so that they can get it out early, and then you can have a conversation about it and address it rather than just letting it rot around the project as untapped sources of negativity. So allowing a day or two a week during most of the project for this kind of communications. You might not have the capacity to do that, but that's what would obviate the problems. So you have to do what you can within your limitations in order to save your time and your stress later. Okay, so then we get to the final one of the problems that we're addressing in this way. And one of the biggest challenges that happens a lot is scope creep on projects. Now, just to make it clear, if you've done everything that we've talked about earlier during the business case phase, and got everyone agreed on what is in and what is not in, and you've done everything during the requirements gathering to prioritize and get people to sign off on what it is that they're going to get as part of the project, and then during the vendor selection, you've agreed what they're going to do, your chances of scope creep are less. Your chances of having arguments about scope creep are less, but it's going to happen on all projects somewhere. So one of the things that we say about that is, okay, well, recognizing that and recognizing that scope creep, a whole bunch of extra requirements coming into your project can have your project look like a failure. How do we avoid that and get the best out of that reality? So the first thing we say is accept and prepare for change. So that means that accept that there is going to be new requests. There are going to be new requests. There are going to be people saying, "Oh, I know I said that a few months ago, but I've now had the realization, having seen the software, that we should be doing it in this entirely different way." So what you do to get the best out of that is you agree as part of your project that there's going to be a change control process. So it's not just a yes or a no on all of these things. You're going back to your management team and saying, okay, I intellectually agree that this will be a beneficial change on the project. I can't make it go away by saying, oh, we could work it a different way. So here is a change that we could do. It'll cost this number of £1,000 and it'll add this number of weeks to the project. Do you want to do it or not? And actually then you're covered either way. If they say don't do it, then of course, you can go back to your stakeholder and say, well, it can be considered again in the future, but it won't be in round one. And if they say, yes, we can do it, then you update your project plan to show it's going to go out, or you update your budget, and there's no arguments about it later. And you're keeping a very careful log of these decisions, so that when the project goes live, months after the initial hope, you've got a track record of exactly why that has happened, and everyone signed off on it as being the best way of running the project. So then, as part of the change control process as well, it's about making sure that your management team agree that this is going to happen, and agree the process for making decisions, and agree that they have to make decisions in a timely manner. They can't just hover around it for ages, because that's very damaging to your project. And then finally, on this one, it's being firm with your stakeholders without being inflexible. You're trying to get their buy-in. You want them to feel like it's their system, and you want them to engage with it and use it. So you can't just say no, no, no to everything. So it's about making people understand that there is a process for evaluating these change requests, and you'll do your best to accommodate where it makes sense to you and where it makes sense to the project. But even a no, there will be a way of achieving this. So it'll be added in later potentially, or we can reevaluate this decision once the new system's in place, because actually your changes in working processes could mean that you don't need to do this anymore. So try and be flexible, and trying to have convivial conversations around this in order to ensure buy-in for the overall solution. Okay, so those are 8 really common areas, and if you can avoid making mistakes on, or if you can put the time in and treat those areas seriously to avoid those mistakes, then you're just vastly less likely to have these disputes between you as a management team and an organization, and between you and your supplier. What we also asked Gordon for his top tip when it comes to change control. Gordon said again that actually one of the main things that he suggests is getting some help on the project early to define your requirements, work with your stakeholders, and explain the art of the possible, and get all of that nailed down, so that you are much less likely to have these new realizations come out later. Okay, what we also provided here is 4 lower tier mistakes that happen a lot. So we couldn't make time to cover them all in the same way, but essentially have a look at these 4 areas. Freeze the video, look at the slide deck we've sent you, and essentially we put a common way of avoiding this pitfall, and making sure that this doesn't happen to you. You're not in the crowd that's getting shouted at. You're in the crowd that's able to focus on the main way forward with the project. Okay, and then as part of a Q&A, one of the main there were a few questions that came up. So the first question that came up was how best to engage with your fund holding group, whether it's your committee, your board, your council, in order to get them to support the project properly. And Jackie and Gordon both gave really good tips on this. Jackie's advice was to engage early with the fundraising group and give them multiple bites of the cherry. So essentially to say on meeting 1, we're going to do this project. We think it's going to cost around this envelope here, but we'll be back in a month's time to give you more detail on that, and just kind of get people used to that. Let any objections come out, let people understand it. Then as you're developing your definition of the project and your costs and your business case, start sharing that with your fundraising group, fund holding group, just the same way you're sharing it with your management team. As long as your management team are aligned, show it to your fund holding group as it's developing, so that by the time you're showing it to them the 2nd or 3rd time, people are more comfortable with it. You've already been able to hear their objections, if there are any, and tackle those and address them in what you're presenting back to them the 2nd or 3rd time. Gordon's really good piece of advice as well was to try and educate where necessary your council or fund holding group with what the project is going to achieve in your different areas of the business. And that means there's a common misunderstanding that they can think, oh, it's just a new version of what we had before, or it's just a glorified Excel spreadsheet of data or something like that. And then making the effort to explain to that group why this project is strategic, why it's going to empower you to deliver on your goals, or by not doing it, you're going to hinder the organization, how it's going to allow you to change your business processes, the way you engage with people to compete with external stakeholders and other membership organizations. So explaining the importance at that level, that it's a genuinely strategic project as opposed to just a bit of software or something tactical that you're doing, can help get that support. Something else that came up on the Q&A was how to get the best out of your management team during the project. So there's a really common thing that happens during these projects where someone might think, well, it's a technology project, I'm not really interested in technology, and therefore I'll let those guys do it. You know, I'm sure they know what they're doing. I'll take advantage of it when it's finished. And one of the key areas of advice that came out from Jackie in that case was again about making sure that the management team as a whole understand the strategic nature, the strategic importance of the project. It's not a project about technology. It's a project about business change. It's a project about empowering you as an organization to do A, B, and C that you're not able to do very well right now. And that only by embracing the project properly and supporting it as a management team are you going to be able to deliver these benefits. So everyone on the management team is expected to understand that and have their role in supporting the project lower down the org chart. Gordon then commented as well that very often, genuinely, the management team don't understand these technology projects. So get a bit of advice in where you can justify that, or at least make sure that you, for instance, if you have to do things on a budget, you're talking to organizations like you, and the not-for-profit sector is very good at sharing information. Organizations like you, and getting them to explain to you what the project took at their side and what could have been done better or what would have worked differently. And then at least presenting that to your own management team so that they understand the root and branch nature of this kind of project. It's not just a technology project. The importance of getting people to change how they work and their role in making sure that works successfully. Okay, just to wrap things up, first of all, I'd like to say thanks again to our panelists, Jackie and Gordon. Thank you so much for your insights and making the time. Just to go through the final bits, we'll provide the video of the webinar. Please remember to fill in your feedback form. We really value that. And for filling in the feedback form, we'll provide a 50% discount on the project management training course. We'll also provide the job aids and the templates for your further learning. So those are taken from the course, but we'll provide them to you as part of the follow-up from this webinar. We'll invite you to join our Dear Savvy community of people who've had issues and want to vent and so on. You can write in with your project problems and you can see the project problems that other people have written in with and the solutions that have been proposed to help them resolve those issues. And we really look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which is on April 18th. And it's on the very vibrant topic of how to motivate your staff and get buy-in during a technology project. Always one of the toughest areas of any project. Okay, well, thank you very much and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.